StoryHinge, episode 78. Taylor, Zajonc, Adventure and Writing.
Conceptually, it's a really good starting point. I mean, what's the point of sitting down to do this unless you're going to bring something just truly special? If you're fascinated with a period of history or a historical figure, or how to write your own story, or things like that, or travel to certain places, there's more often than not a way to do that if you take the time to figure it out and just start taking those first steps towards it.
Welcome to StoryHinge. At StoryHinge, we explore foundational ideas and beliefs. We believe everyone has a beautiful story to grow. Now here's your host, Jason Vidaurri.
All right, welcome everyone out there. Hope you're having a great day. Today we're going to be spending time with Taylor Zajonc. Taylor is a maritime historian, Explorers Club member, shipwreck expert, and avid world traveler. Along with that, he's also an author, and his new book, The Maw, is coming out here in June. Now we're going to talk with Taylor and explore the cross-section of a life adventure and writing. So with all that, Taylor, welcome to StoryHinge.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, my interest in speaking with you is, I looked at some of your life, some of your adventure, and I was like, well, this sounds like someone interesting to talk to. So why don't we go back a little bit and as I see you, I see you as someone who's lived a life of adventure, and I'm curious to see where that started, how that manifests, how that's played out a little bit. And then, of course, it's going to be the intersection of how that ties into writing and creation of story. So we'll start back a little bit in your history.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is the adventure business is a family business, I would say, and my father and I would probably tell the origin story, so to speak, a little differently from one another. His version of it is that when I was in kindergarten, he brought in a piece of shipwrecked treasure to show to the class during a show and tell day, and that my eyes just lit up. I, of course, remember it just a little bit differently. He got involved with an effort to find a lost World War II Japanese submarine sometime in the mid-90s. And what I would do is I would go into his home office when he was there. I would sit on his couch. I'd read all of his books, and I'd listen to his phone calls, one side of them anyway. And I'd meet some of these different people he was starting to work with. And once I got old enough, he started taking myself and my brother on expeditions. So we had a chance to meet people like Russian scientists and deep sea explorers and submersible pilots and people like that, and actually go on these little mini subs down to the bottom of the ocean ourselves at one point too. So that's kind of how it all unfolded. This became part of my professional life as well after I was out of college, and my first job out of college was as an assistant to an archaeologist. And working for a company that had just found a Civil War era treasure wreck. And at one point we were pulling so much gold and silver off of this shipwreck that I was in a locked room for 14 straight hours counting it with two other men. But that's the short version anyway of how I really started just getting involved in all this. And throughout all of this, I was just a voracious reader and loved writing as well.
Okay. Well, I want to hear about one of these adventures, and what, I guess, maybe a little deeper. What does it do for you? What do you feel when you're, I read your one, I guess it was your first one when you were 19 years old and you went down to the bottom of the ocean. I'm thinking, man, I wonder what a 19-year-old is actually feeling and thinking as he's going through this. Or can you give us maybe a little picture of what that's like, some of this adventure?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that what's different between just maybe adventurous travel and some of the things that I've done is the purpose was always to bring something back, whether it was a documentary or more information about a shipwreck or help save some of this cargo off of shipwrecks as they're falling apart and being hit by fishing nets. So to kind of link that back to the what you just said about the submersible trip and being 19 and doing that, if you're going to go 3 miles deep, That's not a short trip.
Hmm.
I think that we were down there for something like 15 hours. So that's too long of a period of time to really sustain a giant adrenaline rush the way that you might if you were bungee jumping or something like that. So I think what sustains somebody like me through all those hours is just this intense sense of curiosity as to what's happening. And that's really what I was feeling more than anything. Every once in a while, I'd flip over and look at the top hatch of this little mini submersible and realize that there was 3 miles of water between myself and the surface, and that could be a little frightening. But
Yeah.
but if I just refocused on that sense of wonder and curiosity, that's really what kept me going through that.
Okay. And so is that something that you at that young age you just said, yeah, I want to keep doing this part of my life, or how did that come about to be more part of your profession?
Yeah, that first trip at 19, I was more a passenger than anything else. I did end up helping an archaeologist on some of his conservation efforts for the artifacts that we pulled up. But after that, my dad started working for a deep sea search and salvage company based out of Florida, and they had just found a big shipwreck project, and they were just hiring anybody that they could get their hands on. So that's really I kind of looked at my options, and that seemed about the coolest thing that I could do. So he said that Mom made him promise to tell me that he'd make me sleep on it before taking the job, but I said I'm not going to. I can tell you what the answer is going to be right now.
I guess I think about that work, and I have some picture of what you're talking about in these different salvaging adventures, and I guess what is the danger factor there? And I guess I don't have a sense of how many people actually do this kind of living and work.
It's a really small group of people. They all seem to know each other, as far as I can tell. It's just one of those really, really tiny industries that a lot of people don't even know exist.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the danger factor that you're alluding to, there definitely is one. I'd put it less than something like climbing Everest, for instance, but it's work at sea with heavy equipment in deep water. So once in a while, there is a tragedy. I've been lucky to not know anybody that's happened to or experienced anything like that myself, but there definitely is a danger factor.
Yeah. Okay. And so, where does you said you were an avid reader and writing? How did that start intersecting with your work?
Well, to kind of go back to fresh out of college, helping an archaeologist on a deep sea shipwreck site, I ended up transferring to the land-based office of this company, and ended up reading their whole library, their whole archives and library. And then at that point, I became the person that they would start sending overseas into archives and libraries all over the world. So I would start writing research reports on potential projects and things like that. And I was just so intensely interested in what really kind of fascinated me was how people behave under stress. And it eventually occurred to me that that's also the basis for character in a fictional context. So anytime I found something that was really just blow your mind fascinating, it would make its way into my into my scrapbook as a potential character element or story element for when I was going to write whatever book I was going to end up writing, which at the time I had no idea what that would even be. Eventually I really sat down and I decided I was going to start working on my craft. Read a really good book about how much it takes to get there. I think the book said that you're probably going to need to write 5 novels before you're good enough to actually get something published. And sure enough, I wrote 5, and by the time I hit 5, I got my first publishing deal.
And about how long ago did that occur?
This was a few years ago. The book came out in 2015, so it does take quite a bit of time to find representation, find publisher, go through the editorial process, and then finally end up with a book in 2015.
Okay. As someone who's gone through that a little bit, what would you say to a beginner writer out there?
I would say there's nothing magical about being a writer. There's no such thing in my experience as somebody that's a born writer. There's really just people who get obsessed with it enough to jump through all of these hurdles to get to the point where they can get something out. It really, in my experience, just comes down to having just a really, really positive outlook and just persevering and getting very comfortable with the word no, because you're going to hear it an awful lot. When you go to publish something, it's not about being good enough and then you get an A on a homework assignment. You're asking somebody to fall in love with your art. And you can't ask just anyone to fall in love with your art. It's about finding the right person, an editor, an agent, a publisher that's gonna see the potential of a project and then really nurture it to publication.
Okay. And so I guess give us an idea on what your stories are about, why would I want to go read your book? I guess maybe that's a question to ask.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a totally valid question. There's a lot of books in the adventure thriller genre, which is what I write. And here's what I think make mine special. The plot of my first two books is about a deep sea salvage diver that's released from prison to find a missing research scientist. So in some ways, this is not an unusual setup for how these books are. But I think that what make mine special is that it's written by somebody who has spent years in this industry. And also, if you're looking for a story that just tries a little harder than a lot of the genre that's out there, it's just got a much more interesting group of characters. A lot of twists and turns that you're really not going to expect, and just a lot of heart in it. And my latest book is about a young history professor. This one is called The Maw. It's coming out in June. It's about a young history professor who gets kind of mysteriously summoned out into the middle of the savannah in Tanzania to the entrance to a recently rediscovered African super cave. This is a cave that's just miles and miles and miles in distance underground. They really don't even have any idea of how big it is. And the reason why he's there, he's got no caving experience whatsoever, is because the explorer that he studied for his whole career went missing there 100 years ago. And they want him to find out what happened. But once he's below the surface and everything starts going wrong, he realizes that he actually has to solve the mystery of what happened to this previous expedition if his own is going to make it back out again. But just to kind of go back to what you said, I think that what people will find about my books is really just the lengths that I went to craft a story that's really just truly compelling. Okay.
And I imagine there's a lot of tapping into your own experiences in this and things you've seen or how's that intersected, I guess? How much are you tapping into some of your own experiences and versus just making up a story?
Yeah, absolutely. So, first and foremost, all of these are completely fictional. That being said, I really tried to, any way I can, tap into some greater emotional truths that come along with exploration and adventure, and I really felt like I had a great big library of experience that I could translate into this. So, for instance, in my current book that's coming out in June, the character goes rappelling for the first time. He's basically on a rope descending into this cave. So what I can do is I can pull from my personal experience as being search and rescue volunteer and learning how to operate these systems and what it felt like to rappel off of a big ledge for the first time. So, this character's experience really draws a lot from my own. When we have this crew working very tightly together, bouncing ideas off of each other and things like that really does come from experiences on expeditions and what those are like and how you behave when you're stuck in a tight area with a bunch of other people that you may not have known really well, and you all have this sense of shared purpose and mission, but maybe a very different idea of how you're going to go about it.
That's interesting. I guess that makes me curious on how maybe some of the misperceptions we might have about this adventure and this work that you do. And you're talking about this teamwork level. Is there any other things that would surprise someone that is unfamiliar with it?
Yeah, absolutely. When I see movies or read books about expeditions and research bases and things like that, one of the things that always strikes me is everybody is just so serious in these books, and that has not been my experience whatsoever. When you're stuck in close quarters with all of these other people, either you learn to laugh together or you're going to hate each other.
Yeah,
so that's something I really try to incorporate. It's like, what? The stakes are high, yes. There's a lot happening, yes. But, just crack a joke once in a while because that's what it's really like.
So have you ever been in a pretty sticky situation that you could share with that story with us?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a few that I can maybe draw from, but I'll tell you one of my favorites. So this goes back to the submersible ride to the bottom of the ocean. If you've ever seen the movie Titanic, that big white ship in the very beginning and those two small Russian submarines, it's all real. They even put the real crew from the real ship into the movie. So if you've ever seen the movie, you probably have a pretty good idea of what these little subs look like. So I'm in one. We're 3 miles deep. It's really small. It's only about 6 foot diameter. And that's just barely enough for 3 people. And we're on the bottom of the ocean looking for our target. Basically what happens is we have to descend so far that the little sub gets blown around by the ocean currents, and we're not actually 100% sure where we are by the time we hit the bottom of the ocean. So we're running these search patterns trying to pick up the trail of this shipwreck again. I hear this buzzer going off, and I look at my pilot, this little tiny Russian guy. He's an ex-fighter pilot. That's where they recruited these sub-pilots from for this program. And he doesn't seem to be fazed by it. I'm not sure if he can even hear it. So I started looking around the control panel to see what's buzzing at us. And because these Russian subs were actually built in Finland, I don't exactly know why or how this happened, but a lot of the instrumentation is actually in English. So I see the light that's flashing, and I read the label on it. It's the one that says leakage. So I kind of think for a second. It's like, well, we are so deep that if there was a leak here, we wouldn't even hear it or feel it. It would just all be over. It would be the most instantaneous thing you can imagine. So, but it's also kind of bothering me that this is going off and nobody seems to be worried about it. So I poke our pilot, and he just reaches over and turns it off and says, "It's no problem."
Shoot. That's wild.
So it's one of my favorite stories. I tell it way too much. I thought it was just hilarious.
Definitely. That'd be awesome. So maybe we'll come back to story itself again and hear about some of your thoughts on what makes a good story. Let's start there if you have anything to say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe kind of frame this as what I would tell somebody that's working on a project or something like that. Is that how the?
Yeah. For someone else who's trying to create a story and just maybe some ideas and helps for them.
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things that I would say would be, first is know thy influences. Everybody is influenced by everything that they read and watch. I think that that's really, really important to recognize. So what I think it's really important to do is to understand those influences and how they've contributed to your craft. That also means knowing your genre, knowing what the conventions of your genre are, how it's supposed to work, what makes a thriller, right? What makes a romance a romance. And then when you actually sit down to work on a chapter, I'm a huge believer in not even starting on that chapter until you have a really clear idea of what you're going to do to turn this into something that's truly special. It's what am I going to do that's going to make this chapter an 11, not just like a 7 or 8. It's serviceable, it's readable, it's decent, but something that's memorable and it hasn't been done before. Unexpected, something that's going to really stick with a reader. And I think that's I'm not saying I hit this with every single chapter, because I'm certain I don't, but conceptually it's a really good starting point. I mean, what's the point of sitting down to do this unless you're going to bring something just truly special to the equation? After that, it's just study story. I think is maybe one of the biggest ones. Really, just everything you read, everything you watch, take it apart and try to understand what makes it tick. There's a lot of video essays and critics that really come at things from a story perspective. They try to understand what makes a story work or not work. And I think that those are a really good thing to just incorporate into your process too.
Okay. I was talking to a recent author, some of the story, basically that creative process of creating a story. And she expressed this, and I've heard this different places and different times, as this, we write from what we know in this area where, from drawing, like kind of what you're talking about, drawing from your experiences and your influences. But she also mentioned this idea, we got to stretch beyond that a bit to this area of a little bit unknown. And that's often where they find a magic or this expansion. And as an author, that's where you learn and grow as well. And kind of this concept, if you're learning and growing as an author, your audience is going to learn and grow along with you. Do you see any of that in your work, or have you had that experience, or does that resonate, or is that more like in a nonfiction environment? I guess I'm curious on your take on that.
I think that's absolutely right. I think it's really well put too. I think that the whole purpose of this is to create something that's greater than the sum of its parts. You put all of the right elements in, but at some point it becomes a emotional self-perpetuating machine, right? Where it's generating thoughts and feelings that can feel very real. I'm working on a small side project right now that I took to a young reader just a couple days ago here, and asked her what she thought of it, and asked her what her favorite part of it, and asked her what her least favorite part of it was. From kind of a critical perspective, when I asked her for her least favorite part, I was expecting, like, well, this part wasn't very well written, or I didn't really get what you were saying here. But instead what she picked up on was, well, I didn't like the way that one character talked to another in this part. I didn't like the way that this character acted. And what she was picking up on was not, a critique of me as a writer, but an emotional response to the work itself. I mean, she was supposed to be a little ticked off because there was one character being really unfair to another one. But that's, for me, that was something that was really satisfying to hear, because I wanted the reader to have an emotional response to that. I wanted it to feel real enough to where a reader would actually complain about how somebody was being treated, even though everybody in the situation is totally fictional.
Isn't that wild how important story is and how powerful it is?
It still takes me by surprise all the time. It's kind of funny. I'm about to come out with my third book here, but I still feel like just totally unprepared for when people actually actually read these. You know what I mean? Because they have a really real response to it.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. And when you described that, I was also thinking of it's also putting a piece of your own self out there. If you, I guess to me, if you've done it well, and you've like you're describing, you're putting your heart and trying to make each part as best as you can, and now your work is going out into the world. What does that feel like?
Yeah, well, I tend to not put a whole lot of emotional distance between myself and my work. So yeah, it definitely feels like a big part of myself going out into the world. And so yeah, I mean, more than anything, I just want people to enjoy a really good story. That's kind of how I come at it. And when people do, it's something that is incredibly moving for me. I can't imagine that I'd ever get used to that.
Yeah. Kind of the interest here in the podcast has been in the second season to dive deeper into story and try to understand how to. I guess I have this feeling that I want better story in the world, better story in our own lives, better story for us personally. Each one of my listeners out there, how do you get better story in your life? Any thoughts along that line from your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the things that you touched on and a few times here is the intersection of this between story and real life.
Mm-hmm.
I think on one hand, story has a lot to do with real life, with like the hero's journey, right? The idea of taking on a challenge, probably failing at it, having to go through all of these different obstacles, hitting a lowest point, and then overcoming it. I mean, that's the core of almost every story. It's also how we learn to ride a bicycle or make friends at a new school, or, you know, it has so much to do with how we develop as people. On the flip side, I think that some folks approach story where they try to make it too much like real life. If I read a story, I've been in several writers groups and things like that, of course. If I read a story that isn't telling me about the author or character's best day that they've ever had or the worst day that they've ever had, and instead it's just like a slice of life or something like that, it's like an average day or what have you, it's just inherently less interesting. It's if you're not, you know, sitting down to tell us about the best or worst of times, then I think that you're, you know, maybe coming at it from the wrong angle. And along those same lines, if you have a character that's just kind of good at everything, they're just inherently less interesting because they're not going through an emotional journey through the course of the story. So one of the first things I always try to do when I come up with an idea is really nail down character arcs and how they're going to change over the course of the story.
That's good, because I think one thing I'm fascinated about is how quick we are to pick up on those things. Some of the things that you mentioned there, and if a story's not hitting those high marks, we feel it right away. Or if a character is not going through their own arc properly, we feel that right away. We feel that disconnect, saying, "This doesn't seem real. This seems like." Or boring, perhaps. It's not real. It seems boring, and we're really quick to pick up on that.
Yeah. More often than not, subconsciously too. I feel it's that's kind of the first part of the brain that picks up on this stuff and starts losing interest.
Very good. Yeah, and you brought up the hero's journey, and I'm actually doing some research on that right now and diving deep because it's so fascinating to me on some of that and how that resonates with life. I think is why it's such a powerful story, because it resonates with our everyday. We intuitively know a lot of that. We're constantly we're challenged by something new, or there's a call to this adventure, this going outside of our own box to something different. And then, you know, oftentimes we don't even hear that call, or we don't listen to that call, and we actually stay in our own box and not do that. But when we actually go out there, that's when the growth starts happening, and these different things move along the way. How has your work I guess the work within looking at story and writing, how has that impacted your own personal story?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel compelled to look for challenges, and anytime I kind of feel like life is slowing down a little bit, I kind of seem to jump on the next crazy project. So I tend to just really push hard against stasis, right, where nothing is necessarily happening. I've had a number of different people talk to me about their lives and the challenges that they want to or wish they had taken on. Maybe they're fascinated with a historical figure or their family history, or they want to write about their own life and experiences, or take on some other type of challenge, whether that could be, travel or even something like volunteering. I think that oftentimes people find reasons why they shouldn't or can't do something like that. And I tend to think that most people can. I mean, we live in an era where almost anybody can become an expert in anything, relatively speaking. I mean, you're not going to become a surgeon by watching YouTube videos, but if you're fascinated with a period of history or historical figure, or how to write your own story, or things like that, or travel to certain places, there's more often than not a way to do that if you take the time to figure it out and just start taking those first steps towards it. That's been interesting to me. People will tell me what they want to do. I ask them why don't they just do it, and then they tell me why they can't, and I don't buy it a lot of the time.
And I think that's good. I mean, that's even for someone like myself. I feel like I've kind of went out there and tried to, but I feel like I've been pretty trying to grow throughout all my life. But I still find that a lot, what you're talking about, it's almost like my own blocks I put on myself and think, oh, I can't do this, or I don't want to do that, or maybe this is too hard. Any thoughts on how we check ourselves on that and really take away those false beliefs and false ideas?
Yeah. I'd say there's maybe two things that help me and that I tell people is first, don't assume that people that do what you want to do are the special people in some way. They're really just like you. They've just given themselves permission to try to tackle this. Instead of looking for what makes you different from them, look at what makes you similar to them. The second thing I would say is just anything you can do to reject analysis paralysis. If you have a big goal, even something that feels like a really larger than life goal, what's the absolute smallest first step that you can take? What's the smallest, most achievable, most reasonable, easiest to do step that puts you in the right direction? Okay, and if you've done that, what's the next tiniest step that you can possibly take towards your goal? If you just sit down and look for the smallest, easiest thing to do that moves you forward, you will, I promise, start getting momentum towards what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And even if it's a small step, just start taking them. I agree with that totally. So I want to make sure, Taylor, that we get a contact if people want to connect with you. Where's the best way they can do that?
Yeah, I love to hear from folks. The best way to reach me is at my website. It's TaylorZajonc.com. That's Taylor, Taylor. Last name is spelled Zajonc. You'll find a little bit of information about me, contact information, the 3 books I've got that I've got out. It's definitely the best way to reach me.
Okay. So I guess maybe looking in the future here, where's your work going? What's on the horizon for you? I know you have this book coming out in June, so that's probably a big part of it. Are there any other things that we should be looking forward to?
Yeah, we'll see. I've got an illustrated children's series coming out, 4 books starting late this year. What I'm really excited about is the hero is named after my son, Samuel Oliver. So it's I'll definitely have more to announce on that in the coming months. Beyond that, just working on a lot of different collaborative projects with a lot of different people, and not sure kind of how it's all going to shake out, but I sure am having fun doing it.
And I want to just give you a last chance to hit something we didn't miss or that we missed, and maybe an advice for the audience out there that are looking around and maybe trying to find an improvement in their life.
Yeah, absolutely. Got to hit this because it's coming up so fast. But next book's coming out in June. It's called The Maw. I think it's the best work I've ever done. There's a book trailer on my website that I think that folks would really enjoy. And as far as advice goes, one of the things I haven't mentioned here that I think is super important is, find the people that are going to help you on your journey. I think that ultimately people that have accomplished the goals that you want to accomplish, they like to talk, they want to share this with you. So that's not to say that you may necessarily be able to touch base with a best-selling author that you like or an absolute expert in your field, but thinking a little bit more locally, asking somebody in your writers group that's really accomplished an awful lot what their advice is or how they would do it if they were you, things like that. They want to teach you. They want to share that information with you. I've reached out. One of my favorite parts about writing is it's given me an opportunity to reach out to authors that I really, really respect. They've been a lot more niche authors. They haven't been, giant blockbuster bestsellers, but more niche folks. But I have been just overwhelmed by their generosity of time and information. And that's helped me immeasurably as I've worked on my own projects. That's great.
Yeah, I love that advice. And on the one hand, sometimes we're intimidated by that idea, but at the other hand, it totally makes sense, because if someone is really good in their craft and it's probably their passion, something they just love, and they put up their heart into it, and what's more fun than sharing that with someone else and passing on some of your knowledge and your experience that you've gone through in that creation. And so I think it's probably really fulfilling on both sides, both for the receiver and also for those giving that and sharing with, the journey that they've already went through.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been my experience. It's not going to be everybody. Not everybody's going to be receptive to this, but as an author, you're probably getting used to hearing the word no anyway, so that should be okay. But a lot more of them are willing to do this than you might think, and I think that you're absolutely right. It's definitely a very mutually fulfilling thing. I mean, there's nothing I enjoy doing more than doing workshops or talking to folks, and then see that kind of light switch on where they realize, wow, this is for me too. I can do this too. This is not just this is something beyond a dream. This is something that's achievable. It's fun.
Yeah. Well, Taylor, I really thank you for your time, for being with us here on StoryHinge. I really love to sharing with you. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Jason. I just so thoroughly enjoyed this. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. I want to thank you all for spending time with us. Thank you again, Taylor, for spending time with us here on StoryHinge. For those of you that want to connect with Taylor and his book and his works, you can do so at TaylorZajonc.com, TaylorZajonc.com, and that link will be in the show notes and on the website, StoryHinge.com. So just a few thoughts before we close today. And one of those is this idea of taking whatever step you can take towards where you want to go. And you don't have to perfectly know where you want to go either. And I think Taylor brought that concept up. If you have an idea, hey, I want to go to this place, or this is part of my dream, or this is how I want to change, take a small step that way and allow, I guess, some celebration and some smaller goals along the way that help you build up some momentum and build up a little more momentum. And that unleashes you to really achieve something that looks way too big, way too grand initially. So I like that concept. I also like this concept if you're going to put a work out there to try to make it special. I think that's pretty cool. I know I've tried to continually improve what we're doing here on StoryHinge with that concept. There's kind of that balance where you want to ship it, right? You want to get something out in the world and not get too caught up in the perfectionism of it. But there's also an element of quality and of making it the best that you can. And there's some balance between those back and forth, I think. But I like the concept of putting something of real value out there, and also of improving that and keep tweaking it and keep improving it and making it better. I think that's going to wrap it up for this week. I want to thank you for tuning into StoryHinge again, and continue to follow things. We're quite busy here this summer with family and personal things and moving, and quite a bit going on here. There's also some other works coming out, and that newsletter is coming, as I've promised multiple times. And my goal is to get it out before May. I still have about a week left, and it will happen. In fact, I'm planning on getting it out here this weekend. So thank you all for those who have signed up for the newsletter. For those of you still interested, you can do that on the website, storyhinge.com. All right, everyone. You guys have a great week. We will catch you next week.
Thank you for sharing with us at StoryHinge. We hope this time together has added more goodness to your journey. Until next time, onward and upward, and may your own story continue to grow more beautiful.